Okay, this is a hopefully very brief, sorry about that, this is a hopefully very brief video as a response to some of the events that were occurring in Australia today. Today is the 24th, and in Australia we saw a vast number of people out on Freedom Day marches, and some of them encountered tactics by the police that could have been very easily countered by the crowd had they been aware of the approach to do so. So this is just about crowd tactics. We can make it very specific, not going into broader strategies or that sort of thing. But just the tools that you can use in a crowd situation to control the crowd and the behavior of the police in a non-violent fashion. This is all non-violent. I'll put that in the title as well. But these are based on having studied Aikido, which is the art of peace. It's a particular kind of a martial art, very much denigrated but extremely powerful, especially if you study it for a number of years. Anyway, in Australia we found that there were large crowds and they were using drums to coordinate chanting, all right, which is good. But the crowd, that's all they could do with that drum, was coordinate people in a general pulsing action relative to the drum. If they had thought about this ahead of time and had distributed instructions, even rudimentary instructions, they could have had a situation where the drums could have been used to control large-scale crowd behavior, very much the way that had been done in wars in the past with, like, the old style of marching armies. With sword fights and that sort of thing, right? This is a non-violent approach to that. So you can use drums to control your part of your crowd for your tactics and strategies. You can also use drums as a tool to disorient and confuse and control the actions of your opposition within the battle of the moment. So in this case, we had Australian populace versus police. If they'd had enough of the drums, they could have controlled the police just simply by deafening them relative to their own internal communications, because the police were wired. Not very extensively, by the way. Not all of them were. So they weren't getting control information from a central point on a person-by-person basis. But so that sort of thing can be done. You can also use the drums. You could say, 3 quick beats, boom, 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 means back, back, everybody retreat, right? So boom, 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 space, boom, 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 space, boom, 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 space. And you just put that in a little sheet and get it to everybody's attention. And then you just have your drummers be prepared to follow instructions from someone who gives them the controls, because crowds can use their sheer presence to control the actions of the opposition. And so in this case, we were talking about police. Here's the very specific situation we had involved. There was this square. I don't know if it was in Melbourne or Sydney. There's very tall buildings over here. There's brick pathway down here. These are planters with plants in them here. There's a clear central area. There's more building. These are buildings. And so this is in a square, and the crowd is flowing along in here, and the police are like right around like this, and at some point there's a scuffle. Some of the police, there's very extensive police presence in this area here, so they've sort of cordoned off this particular area, and that's their point of control. And what they're using it for is this cleared area in here is only police. And what happens is some of the police, when they encounter opposing forces out here, will grab people from the crowd and then pull them back across the planters in here, where the police outnumber everybody and can control everyone, because the police have this sort of barricade situation here. Now, it's very apparent, seeing this from the outside, that it would have been very easy for everyone to have controlled the police in this area, because what these barriers were doing in forming that nice clear area for the police to work in also encapsulated the police. It made that them that much less easy to become mobile and move as a unit or even individually, because they had to contend with these barriers, which restricted their movement going back and forth. And at some point, all the police collapsed back into this area with the barriers as they're pressed on by the crowd. And you can see there's some kind of a structure over here, some kind of a bus, something that people are getting up on. And then at some point they're all shouting because the police are arresting people. They're throwing people from the crowd into this area, and they're putting those plastic straps on them and putting them into the in restraint and throwing them down, on the ground with the hands behind the back. And so these are crowd tactics that we can use, right? If you were in part of this crowd, you could have used a drum signal to call all your drummers and cause attention to be gathered to this area here. If you get a bunch of drummers there, you could have told the crowd ahead of time, and people will do this naturally. If you hear a bunch of people banging on drums all at the same spot, rush over there, okay? And so the instructions need not be very complex to get this to organize. First thing is no fighting, no violence. Just put that on top of everything. No violence, no fighting, because you don't have to do it. All right, these people in Australia here, all of the crowd all the way around, seeing what was going on, started chanting, "You serve us, you serve us." Now, there was a very key point right there where they could have continued with that and controlled the actions of the police, but they don't know, so they did not. Okay, and here's what happened. You could see, as an outside observer watching the video, and not caught up in the emotion of it all, you could see the look on the police force member's face all throughout here. All of the faces of the police here got very much anxious when the crowd started getting in sync. So the crowd did that correctly. They should have all chanted the same thing. They should have all chanted the same thing and should have done it in the following fashion. Instead of saying, "You serve us," which is a rather abstraction of the situation, they should have said, the crowd should issue instructions, okay? This is where BLM kind of fucktards and the Antifa, they understand, well, and not Antifa, they're too chaotic, but BLM understands what you need to do. In a mob situation like that, you need to insist and you need to imply directions. So they should have yelled, "Stop, arrest," or, "Stop, handcuffs." But stop would have been the key thing. Stop. And get the drums going, stop, and everybody chanting, "Stop, stop, stop." Believe me, those cops would have frozen. They would have stopped because they were completely surrounded right here, right? 100% surrounded, outnumbered maybe 1,000 to 1 for all I know, a lot of people. And so if the crowd had been chanting, "Stop, stop, stop, stop," and then "Release them, release them, release them, release them," see, you could get the instructions across to the cop, but chanting, "You serve us," while it's a good reminder of the relationship, doesn't get the immediacy. It does not imply instructions, doesn't get things to occur. They could have had all of these people released by two things: by forming up around the police and just standing there and not letting the police do anything, can't move in or out, and then just doing this chanting. And they would have had to have a strategy. Okay, the tactic is to chant. The strategy is what you're going to chant to achieve your goal. And so the goal would have been to get these people released. That would have been number one goal. And so that you would have said, "Stop, arrest," or whatever pertinent for the Australians, or "Stop, you fuckers," or whatever, And then the second thing to said was release them, release them, release them, or free them, free them, free them, whatever. And you keep doing this until the cops have no choice. They will do as you say because they have no other option under the circumstances. They won't be able to communicate with anybody because there's going to be too much noise. They will not be able to get any kind of radio communication. Yeah, they can have radio talking, but if they can't hear, they won't have a 5x5. In terms of signal strength, maybe they've got 5 signal strength, but they'll have 0 in terms of comprehension because they just won't be able to hear nor to communicate effectively. So you've cut off their communication with the chanting and the drums. And then you would tell them, "Release them." And then once the crowd sees that, the crowd does all of the cheering and stuff, at that point, you'll notice that the police will naturally collapse back. Then the crowd should have some method of directing that itself should part here such that all the police could leave, and then the crowd should just simply chant, "Leave, leave, 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 leave," and they will leave. Insistence like that en masse will supersede any kind of training these people have. They will be lucky to be able to walk out of there without peeing their pants. I am not kidding you about that. So remember this, there are crowd tactics. Go in and study the, if you want to, you can study The Art of Peace, you can study the unarmed or non-lethal tactics of the Japanese. You can also study the armed tactics of the Romans and just do it without the swords. If you do things in an organized fashion, massed up like this, the people you're dealing with here won't be able to cope with it. The thing is, okay, so the downside of this is that these cops would continue to try and arrest people around here. A, they're going to run out of these little strappy handcuffs real quick, and then more people will just keep filling in. That's the thing you have to do. You just have to have all the people committed to doing it and getting arrested if they have to, and just doing it and doing it and doing it, right? And you let people know you're going to be a fucking hero among your crowd for having gotten arrested by these guys on Freedom Day. No matter what you go through, it's worth it. Believe me, right? Anyway, so they will accommodate a certain number of new arrests, but then they will be overwhelmed and they just won't be able to do it. Their tactic will break down, because what they're doing is they're taking one guy to one fellow here, and then 2 or 3 other guys help him bring the person to be arrested right there. And then these guys try and fill in the gap. Well, if that crowd surges in and fills in more people right away, then they've got to start trying to arrest more people, and they can't go, they have to have 3 people to control 1. Always look at their tactics. 3 people to control 1. If you can bust that up, they have no control. If you can cut them down to 2 to 1 or even 1 to 1, then they've lost, 100% lost, because they're not in control of anything at that stage anymore. And what you really want to do, in my way of thinking, is to corral them, force them to stop their behavior by chanting, drive them fucking crazy, not let them out of that area, just have a crowd that's too fucking thick and gets ahead of them any way they want to go. And yes, they have horses, but horses are very easy to control with chanting. Okay, you can do that to a horse that is just, you can do, it does it very nasty to a horse to chant at them as humans like that. You can get horses, if you know horse commands and you give them in command voices and every finger points at them, horses will fucking freak. Even if you're back 6 or 8 feet, they will freak. It's a tactic called looming. It always works with animals. Okay, and you're going to loom the horse, but you got to be careful because you don't want to spook them. You don't want to freak them out and have them run into the crowd. So you want to make sure that everybody behind them parts, and then the people in front of them, so that you get them to turn around and go the way you want. Everybody there would start saying, move, 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 and then you'd put your finger out, and everybody would point their finger at the horse, and you'd get up there and you'd just say, move, horse, move, move, move. And that horse is going to fucking freak out. Believe me. He's going to turn around and want to get the fuck out of there. They don't like humans that much anyway, especially large crowds of humans, no matter how they're well trained. So anyway, so that deals with the humans part, right? Or with the horses part. The humans part, what you'd want to do is you'd want to say, okay, this is the difficult part, is getting the coordination, having someone there have presence of mind to say, okay, all you fucktards over here, all you Aussie freedom lovers, part. Give them a way out. And then everybody else start pointing and saying, leave down this way, leave, 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 leave. And they will. And this works whether it's in France or whether it's in Britain or wherever. A certain number of people are going to get arrested. Okay, so a couple of other tactics. If you wanted to corral these guys here, that all you need to have are handkerchiefs, little bits of cloth, okay? So you take these with you. You take half a dozen of these things with you. First off, they're good for sopping up blood, if it comes to that, or wiping the eyes, that sort of thing, for tear gas and those kind of things. But you have a bunch of these in they're cheap. These are the little throwaway things. Have these in your pocket or your backpack, right? You can, if you want, you can do things to them, but I would prefer that you not turn them into really aggressive weapons, but you could if you wanted to. But I won't go into that at the moment. But they're a great nonviolent tool, because what you can do is you can have people surrounding the cops and you can just give them 2 of these. And so you grab one end and you give the piece of the cloth to the guy next to you. And so you grab that cloth, right? You're forming a barrier with the cloth itself surrounding the cops, right? Individually or in a group. They'll see this as a barrier. They will understand it at an intuitive level that they're being corralled. And it gives you something to pull against in case they push on you. And so you respond, your part of the crowd responds differently because it is now linked by all these little bits of cloth, and they go in all these directions as you move it around, right? As you pass these little bits of cloth around and tie everybody together like this, if the cops were to surge, when they surge at this point right here, they're going to be trying to pull against people that are way the fuck up there that are connected by these bits of cloth. It is truly as though you are roped. Now, yes, the weakest hands will break this thing, but the strongest hands will hold whole groups of it together, and the cops will have a very hard time. The police will have a very hard time doing anything. Plus, if you're holding on this and they try to decide to arrest you, then, and somebody else has got strong hands on the other end of it, then they're pulling against them as well. And it becomes a real tug of war. And as you can see, it's a hugely violent weapon of war. So you can be arrested as a terrorist for a piece of snot rag, you know. So anyway, but it's extremely effective. So you got to be smart about this stuff, right? And there's a lot of people that have studied it, so pay attention to the wisdom that they offer there. And then one other thing. Okay, so this is an evil trick, and you got to be careful about it so you don't injure yourself. But I don't know if I've got any of the zip ties here. The things they put around your wrists are basically these zip ties, big, wide, flat versions of a ratcheted zip tie. And so what happens with them, let me get that over here. Okay, so what happens is that you could actually bust the plastic. A lot of them you can break the plastic by putting it under tension and then smashing it on something, because it's strong, it's tough to pull, but once it is stretched tight, it's very fragile to a sharp blow against a sharp edge. So if you had a sharp edge of a brick or something like that and you're bound, you can break the bind. You have to be careful you don't injure yourself. You probably will no matter what, but there's an easier way to deal with this, okay? And so these things work by having a ridged piece of plastic go through a stronger piece of plastic mechanism in which there is a ratchet point. There is a ratchet point, let me draw it in red, mechanism, okay, that comes down and fits in there. And once they're pulled through, you can't pull it back the other way because the sharp edge of this pinion, basically, it's a little pinion, prevent that going back against the ridges here. So you would literally have to, if you wanted to rip it with your strength, you would have to be strong enough to tear the join of this particular plastic part right there. But in essence, this is a ratchet mechanism, kind of like that, and through which these bladed bits that are attached to the plastic come on in and move through. And so it pulls it, and it can't go back the other way unless you have the tool to release this, okay? And here's the thing. You can release those with a little tiny bit of plastic yourself. You can release them. The very best thing to use to release them is a small sewing pin. You could also use a safety pin, and that would prevent you from getting hurt. You can take a small safety pin. The part of the pin itself has to be this distance right here on the little block on the restraining strap. And so I think that would have to be 3/4 of an inch. And so fundamentally what you do is you take a pin or other small device and you insert it here. This is the casing around this strap that's got you bound. And you can do this with your hands bound, even if they're behind you, if you can get at your pin or your safety pin. So it makes sense to hide that pin back here in your belt or clothing or somewhat otherwise secure it back here. Now that's why I suggest a full-on safety pin so that you don't sit down and stab your ass with your escape mechanism, right? But what you do is you take that pin and you use it as a wedge and you just put it in here across the top of the notches in the strap, and you push on this, and you can push this ratchet part up and swing it out. It'll cause this area right here to break down. That'll swing up, and it'll go over the top of this as though it was being pushed up by that next ratchet restraining part going through. You're just doing it across the top of them with a device that's very small. It needs to be metal or some really tough plastic. You can use, for instance, these small electric or electronics probes. Because of the way that they're made, you could cut off this much of it or so, but it'd be difficult to grip. Maybe just do that part right there and hide it on you in some way. This is a lot more visible than a small safety pin, but you can use the pins and work them in there and just push up on it, and then you'll be able to pull the strap back the other way enough to get your hands out. Bear in mind, you only have to usually you're only going to have to move it 2 or 3 of these notches to be able to get your hand through it on the big wide ones. So another tactic you can use. So bear in mind, drums, bits of cloth, non-violent kind of things, and attach an escape mechanism so that while the police are otherwise occupied, you can free yourself and go wander about, right? Anyway, so have fun. Oh, and also, practice your looming. It'll work on dogs. Won't work on cats. It may work on some snakes. A lot of them not, but it'll work on most other animals. Certainly almost all herd animals, especially the horses. The smarter herd animals really freak out. So use it wisely. You don't want to use it for evil. It's only for good. Anyway, guys, live long and prosper. This was just, a reasonably quick one to aid us with some crowd tactics. We're all going to need them. The world's going to get kind of strange here as the global counterinsurgency against the evil globalist continues. Live long and prosper.